Joan Retallack's Not a Cage. What's the setup here? Max?
She's clearing off her bookshelf. She's moving or something. There's some books she needs to get rid of.
I don't think we know. She's just making room for new books. She's culling her library.
There's a little stack that she's looking at and says, well, I'm gonna try to write a poem based on some of the language that I find in here.
Kristen, what language?
It's, I believe, the first and last line of the books.
Mm-hmm. Or magazines or journals?
Magazines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What usually happens, Anna, have you ever witnessed the culling of a personal library, people throwing books out?
If
not, we'll pass along.
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah.
And what goes on there?
You're going to have to go through and you think like, oh, I haven't read that.
And I'm never going
to read it again. Oh, maybe I'll save this for my little cousin or something like that. Maybe you put that away. Or there's just stuff that you will just never read again. Mm-hmm. So you put it in a box and you put it away.
Okay. And what is our relationship, Emily? What is our relationship to our books?
Well,
those of us who are readers.
You love them. They're sort of memorial devices that we have to remind us of experiences that we remember.
And you've given them away. You have given them away, sold them. Okay, so what's the feeling that's being implicitly conjured here, Amaris?
But these are also books that failed to capture her attention. So her relationship to them is different. And we can tell by the language that they seem to be sort of obscure texts in a way.
There are really books that she doesn't need.
Yeah.
They're not the kind of book Emily was describing.
Right.
She's read it a million times and it's time to get rid of it. As you know from the Poem Talk discussion, I'm one of those who thinks that it's important to know what the books are. Because I think of Joan Retallack and her place in the history of poetry, and I think, well, let's see, the poet A.I. is not a poet that the poet I is not going to be someone that she's going to read, or Richard Howard is not a poet that she's going to be interested in. And so, in a way, she's saying what she doesn't like. Why call this Not a Cage, Allie? Why Not a Cage?
Well, that's a reference to John Cage.
It's a reference to John Cage, and Joan Retallack is Cagean. Knew Cage, studied with Cage, cares about, and is Cagean in her mode. Okay, as well as Maclovian. She's also Maclovian. But what else does it refer to? So Not a Cage would mean what in terms of John Cage?
Well, it could be, this was mentioned in the Poem Talk.
Yeah.
That, this is very similar to a cage, but it's not actually one. If you kind of take it in a more literal sense, not a cage, you're not trapped. There's a certain freedom that's kind of
not trapped by the procedure because...
Well, because it leaves room.
Okay, what does it leave room for, Amaris?
I interpreted Not a Cage literally to mean that each of these sentences being the first and last of books that she didn't want to get ensnared in, by using them in this poem, she's opening them up to her own meaning. So they do have a usefulness for her in composition. She's
liberated from having to read these awful books, or books that she doesn't want to read. Okay, and more literally in the poem, what is Not a Cage? The phrase?
Not a building this earth, not a cage.
It's a line. It's a line from poems, I believe, by Richard Howard. Yeah, so what do we do with this? What's good about it? What's the point?
Well, I don't know if this is the point. I wouldn't say that this is the point. But I just kind of thought just a couple minutes ago for the first time that when you're getting rid of books, if you ever pass someone who has just kind of put their books out on the street and, people come and kind of inspect them in a way it's like one man's trash is another's treasure. And by making this a poem, she's kind of offering bits of this to everyone who might want it, which is...
So she's got an impulse to save something from it, an impulse to archive, an impulse toward not letting it go all the way. Kristen, this has a Cagean seriousness, an honesty, and a holistic sensibility about it. doesn't it? It's
It
not a
does.
slap your knee funny poem.
No, I mean, even though she's choosing, she has, a constraint on it in that she's only using the first and last lines of the books. And it's not meant to be jokey that she says, see foot 1957, also watermark 1906, chapter 8, chapter 13, that's not supposed to be funny.
That's a
It's just-
documentary impulse. She's got to get it down just the way it was. This is very different in its tone from the chapter 9.3 poets, who are openly uncreative and open, as Kenneth Goldsmith would say, he's stealing stuff, he's stealing phrases, he's sampling. What does sampling mean? This is an easy question, but it's worth saying. Dave, what is sampling?
As far as music goes?
Yeah.
It's when you take a short section of a song or a melody and repeat it over and over again.
Or, like literally in audio technology terms, what do you do when you sample?
You lift it from one song and put it
You
into
steal
another
it.
one.
You steal it, right? It doesn't belong to, I'm going to take it and I'm going to rework it and make it my own. And that's the sensibility of where we're headed with the conceptual poets and the unoriginal poets. This has a cousin relationship to that. This takes the holistic sensibility and honesty and seriousness of the Cagean, of the somewhat utopian Cagean mode. In this case, document, preserve, that kind of, I almost want to say Whitmanian impulse to get it all down, but to take it systematically and impersonally. And then there's a cousin relationship between that and the high hilarity of the uncreative writing of the Flarf people and of the conceptualists. And when we think about this poem now in the internet age, we think about, as Danny Snelson in the Poem Talk said, we think about this as giving us the possibility to find out what's out there, to find out where these books are. Jenna Osman, who's a chapter 9.2 poet, who's dropping leaflets we discussed, is a member of that Poem Talk crew. And what's her position, distinct from Danny Snelson's position? Do you remember what she says? She's not happy about what Danny says.
She's against bringing in those outside references. She'd rather read it as words on the page, not divorced from the biographical context.
So she's more purely Cagean. So now we have an opportunity finally, and I don't know how this is going to work out. So you'll help me here. We have a chance to say something embodied in Jenna Osman's concern about a more pure Cageanism. We have a chapter 9.2 sensibility. Embodied in Danny Snelson, who's more of a chapter 9.3 guy. We have a chance to say talk about some distinctions between these two versions of this version of postmodernism. Who wants to give it a try, give it a start? Kristen, I know you can start us off on this.
So, I mean, it kind of goes along with what you were just saying, that it's the difference between, a new critical type reading where you don't
Close
take
reading.
in close reading, where you don't take in any outside sources and you just focus on the text. And even if this is taken from outside sources, but we're not going to look up what they were, we're just going to read it as a text. Versus, I'm just going to sample from everyone, and it's kind of funny because it's kind of playing a joke on what this is in a way.
If this is less of a joke, why? What's it mean? What's its significance, Max?
If this is less of a joke.
Yeah, not a cage. This is serious. If it's serious, what is it? Think about Cage's and McClo's concept of doing this. If we could do this across society, the world would be better.
Well, if we do challenge our ideas of who owns language and those ideas of control, then I think that does, in the Maclovian sense, push us towards some kind of utopian place or society.
Which would be fabulously ironic in that this utopia is arrived at by discarding, or I guess it's recycling rather than discarding. Does anybody want to say anything? So we've covered the Osmanian side of this. Somebody want to talk about the other side of it, where we're headed?
Well, this isn't really the other side. It's kind of just in between them. I guess it includes both of them, but I think it kind of points to the nature of language in general, and that you really can't anchor ultimately it's always going to be free depending on the time you're reading it and who's reading it. So this language originally came from many different books, and now it's, being kind of taken into the poem, and then depending on when you read it, if you read it kind of in the time or era of 9.2, you might get something different out of it than if you read it,
In the
in 9.
Google Books
Right,
era.
exactly. So I think it just kind of emphasizes just the fluidity of, of making meaning from language. It doesn't have to be set.
So what was moderate about what you just said? So it's okay in 9.2 and it's also okay in 9.3. That's a nice moderate statement. Let's wrap up by considering the last line. First of all, do we know that Joan Retallack did this in the order in which she took notes on a yellow legal pad as she was getting rid of her books? That these are delivered in that order? Do we know that one way or other?
No.
We don't. Should we assume that that fabulous last line simply was the last book that she discarded?
No.
I don't think so. She said she made lists of sentences and phrases from beginnings and endings of books, culling a lot, so there were many more beginnings and endings on the yellow pages that ultimately went into the poem. That implies that she did some, at least, excluding. I didn't change words or orders of words within the units, but did decide the length of each. So we're getting a hint at what Jackson McCloak refers to when he talks about not really knowing what he's doing, but still doing a certain revision on the Stein. So here's the last line. You tell me its significance. The most obscure things have already been said. What does it actually mean to put something like that in this poem, to find it? First question is, what does it mean if you encounter this in a poem in which the writer actually wrote the words? What does it mean when you encounter it as the last line of a poem for which the writer found the line? Either one, the most obscure things have already been said. Perfect for this part of the course. Amaris?
My first thought is that the incomprehensible has already occurred and been done away with. And here she's combining pieces of text from various textbooks. It feels like to me, which would be very much ingrained in their specific genre and their system of language. So it feels to me like the Bernadette Mayer experiment of inserting like the psychology textbook after a piece of your own writing and saying, why are they separated into these two different genres? Why is there journalistic writing? Why is there poetic writing? And combining them in that way, the most obscure things have already been said in the sense of dividing language into these counterparts.
Very good. Who wants to take another crack at this?
I mean,
Anna?
to me, like, to me, what she's saying is that the most obscure things have already been said means that everything has already been said, even the most obscure things. Even though it's obscure, it has still been said, and that you just have to find the language. That everything that's ever, like, nothing new under the sun, kind of that everything is already out there.
So all you have to do is dip into some books, even those that you're discarding, and
There it is.
there's plenty of obscurity there. Emily, you didn't know I was going to do this, but I'm going to give you the final word.
Oh, boy.
Give it a shot. The most obscure things have already been said.
Well, this is a poem of things that have already been said, and all of them in their sort of removal from their context are obscure. And it seems just a sort of concluding statement that this poem in of itself isn't original, and the things it consists of isn't original, and maybe that's okay.
You love books, and the next time you discard them, because you will have to discard them, you're going to move at some point and get some new books, right? What will you do to preserve that you own them?
To preserve that I own them?
Yeah, don't just get rid of them now that you've read Not a Cage and been through chapter 9.2.
Oh, maybe I'll write a poem about it, in which the most obscure things have already been said.
I think that was probably the right answer. Thank you so much, Emily.